Good morning and welcome to the Real Estate Chicas talk show. I am Jen Olmsted, the owner of Olmsted Real Estate Group, and I have some very special people with me today.
Good morning.
Hi. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Ana Montemayor. I'm a real estate agent from Olmsted Group. Hola a todos los que nos están escuchando en español o en cualquier parte del mundo que hablen español. Hoy vamos a hablar acerca de inspecciones en la casa. Hi, how are you, John?
Hi, my name is John Howard III. I'm the owner-operator of Tri-City Pro Home Inspections, and I'm here to answer all you guys' questions. I look forward to this.
So before we begin, we want to let everybody know that we are still doing the contest for a day pass at the iCryo. Yes. Anna, do you want to show it and talk about it?
We have a special raffle. If you send your email address to any of the phone numbers, my phone number or Jennifer's phone number, right there, send us your email. We'll do a raffle. We're giving one more week you will have a guest pass, which includes all the services, which is the cryo chamber. You go there and freeze for a little bit. Then you have the infrared sauna or the compression. We also have the floating bed. Have amazing services. So we want you to enjoy it, and just send us your email. You'll be part of the raffle, and we'll take you to cryo to freeze a little bit in the cold weather. Why not?
It's actually really cool. Your body feels amazing afterwards. So, I definitely recommend it and, check it out. But we have John Howard with us today. He's one of my favorite home inspectors. He does a really great job, incredibly thorough. And we're going to talk about some things you should look for if you're a homeowner, if you're thinking about selling, and if you are in the market for a home, some things and tips and tricks that might help you when trying to make that decision as to whether or not the home is right for you. One thing in this market right now is people have to make a decision and they have to decide pretty fast. So, when we're in the house for a half hour and the buyer has to decide whether or not the home is for them, it can be really stressful because there's a lot of things that they don't get to see that first time through. So first and foremost, home inspectors are so important. It's such an important process of purchasing a home. I always tell my clients they should not waive home inspections. There's so much that not only that can be brought to your attention, but there's so much that you learn about your home in that hour and a half that you're there with a home inspector. So I highly recommend home inspections. But there's a lot of things that you learn that you can also do in time. So I always tell people use that home inspection as like a honey-do list. So maybe not everything's going to be a major, but if you go and you're going to renovate a room, take a peek at that home inspection, see what they highlight. Maybe it needs, updated outlets, or there's a tripping hazard or something along those lines. You can use that as kind of a guide of, okay, we're going to renovate these rooms and we're going to check off these things that were noted on the home inspection. So
yeah, just to echo that sentiment, I couldn't agree more. And it's not a shameless plug for myself. I honestly believe that as buyers, oftentimes we look at things through rose-colored glasses. We're in an extremely competitive market. Everybody wants a house. People are getting outbidded. And oftentimes people get tired and they see an actual house and they say, you know what, I just want to put an offer in on this house. And in order to make that offer more competitive, they say, hey, we may waive the inspections. A lot can happen in that scenario. And we don't want anybody to end up with buyer's remorse. So I would encourage people to always make sure you get a home inspection. Even if you have your inspector walk through the house with you and you do a pre-inspection, you may not actually have a document that you can refer to. But I love taking clients through actual properties, and I'll go in and I'll take off the electrical panel box. I'll make sure we don't have double tap wires. I'll go in the basement and make sure there's no galvanized pipes. I'm willing to climb into an attic and see if there's insulation in there. So that way you'll have this information ahead of time, and it can definitely sway whether you want to put in an offer in a moment's notice type of situation.
And that's actually a really good point. Some of these homes, like for example, estates or bank owns or foreclosures, they will let you know the home is being sold as is. Yep. What does that mean? That means that when you make your offer, you're assuming the condition of the house as is. So if you do a home inspection after the fact and you find some major issues, you could still be held responsible and follow through with the contract. So having a home inspector come through with you during the showing, especially if you're already interested in the house, it's a really great factor because John can point out ahead of time, okay, here are some major issues. And then we can strategize on what our offer is going to be, knowing that these things are going to have to be addressed. So
I think that's a great tip for people when they buy. Now there are some properties that are sold as it is. It's just I'm bringing John to walk with you and maybe point some the major issues. That's a great tip to have for people there.
Yeah, and home inspections could be $500, $600, $700, whereas a pre-inspection is $50. And if you were to go with Tri-City Pro, I credit that $50 towards a full-on home inspection. So let's say you went and seen a house. We did a walkthrough. You said, you know what, John, based on what you told us, we still want to purchase this property. And now you want me to do what's called the full-on structural inspection. The money that you paid for the pre-inspection gets credited there. That way you're not double dipping. You're not paying for the same service twice.
There you go.
That's great. That's awesome.
What are the most common? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. You can ask your question. We have so many questions.
Yeah.
What are the most common issues that you see when you do home inspections?
I get this question a lot. One of the things that I really see, and we live in the Northeast in the capital region, is the vast majority of houses, regardless of how important we know it is, don't have gutters, guys. A lot of homes don't have gutters, and gutters are very vital to the function of a house, because what a gutter does is it helps with water management. So just think of the roof. You got a big, huge roof that's got a bunch of square footage, and you got rainwater that's coming off that roof, and it actually goes down the side of the house and works its way into the foundation. So if we have gutters that have extensions on it that can help funnel some of that water away from the foundation, that ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So gutters is one of the number one things I see immediately when I pull up to a house. I'm looking for gutters, because that's going to give me an indication. Do I have a wet basement? Is there any hydrostatic pressure? What does the grading look like? Without gutters, that's a telltale sign that there might be other issues.
What are some other common issues in our area that you find on your home inspections?
So you alluded to it earlier. So one of the other things that I find that is extremely common is a lot of the houses in the capital region have been built years ago. So code has changes, and as inspectors, we don't inspect to code. And the reason why we don't inspect to code, because different municipalities have different codes. But what we do inspect to is standard building practices. And now standard building practices says that anytime that you have an outlet, an electrical outlet that's within 4 feet of a water source, or it's on the exterior of the home, you want that outlet to be GFCI. So that's one of the common things I see often too. If I walk the exterior of a property, very seldom do we have those GFCIs. And a lot of you may not know what that acronym stands for, but GFCI stands for ground fault circuit interrupter. So it's that outlet that you see in the bathroom that typically has a red button and a black button, and it'll reset. You can press the button for it to reset. That's vitally important, because we want that device to trip and cut off electrical current to prevent somebody from being electrically shocked.
Wow.
And that is so. Question for you though, because I always thought that a GFCI had that little reset in the test, but that's not always the case, right? Sometimes it's down at the panel. How does that work?
Right. So now that's a very valid point. Now they have art fault breakers that can actually trip at the breaker. So instead of the actual outlet having the reset button right there for you, that same outlet can trip. And when I say trip, what that means is that cuts off the electrical current. But in order to reset it, now you have to go to your electrical panel box and flip the breaker back at that location. So that was a very good point, Jen. So
if you're checking out a kitchen and checking to see if there's a GFCI, it may not necessarily be right there in front of your face with that test reset button. Right. And that having a home inspector to test all of that is really important, because they're going to be able to tell you whether or not that's there.
So even still on a pre-inspection, I have a handy device. They sell them at Home Depot. They're only about $12. And there's a button that you depress on the actual device as you poke it into the outlet, and it's supposed to trip. So even though you don't see the actual reset buttons on that outlet, it still should do the same thing. And it illuminates. So if there's no power going to it, you won't have the illumination, and you'll know that there's no electricity flowing to that actual outlet. And then you'll trace it back to the circuit breaker, and then you'll flip it back there. So yeah, you're right.
What are you noticing with radon? I've noticed that radon is something that is starting to become higher and higher lately. And some of the homes that have had a radon test, one of the homes I just did, the level was at 47, and it was probably the highest I've ever seen. So tell me a little bit about your radon experience.
So you're blowing me away. What I will tell you is that there was a house that was converted from a 2-family to a 1-family, and the house actually had a daycare in it. And Habitat for Humanity did it. So you would assume with that level of professionalism that they would cross all their T's and dot all their I's. They had radiant floor heat. They had a high efficiency furnace, tankless hot water unit. They had all of this technology in there. And they had sprinkler systems set up, and all this stuff was in compliance in order for this house to be used as an actual daycare. What I want to tell you is I set up my radon canisters and I measured for radon, and it came back at 7.66. Anything over 4.0, the EPA says we have to put what's called a radon mitigation system in there. Mm-hmm. So for those of you that don't know what radon is a organic compound that comes from the Earth's crust. It's actually uranium. And it comes into your home through your basement foundation or your slab, and it's in every home, believe it or not. The issue is what the level is. So I'm not going to tell you all radon is harmful, but when we get up to 3.5, 4.0, the EPA says radon is the number 2 cause of lung cancer in non-smokers. So it's not going to kill you instantaneously, but that prolonged exposure over a period of time makes people very, very sick. So I suggest, hey, let's have this test up front so we know ahead of time what we're getting into. I did an inspection in Waterville recently, and the house was built in the 1800s. It's like 2 doors down from a police station. And when I went in the basement, there was actual like cobblestone in the basement. So when there's cobblestone in the basement, you don't have mortar. It's not a concrete slab. You actually have these joints around each individual brick. Mm-hmm. The radon levels were extremely high, and that homeowner was able to negotiate putting the radon mitigation system in with the buyer, and they still move forward with the purchase.
The great news is that a radon test or a radon system in comparison to other major ticket items is really not that expensive. So the system itself is really simple. It's basically a fan and a vacuum that sucks the radon out from the basement floor and makes it so that it is not collecting in your basement.
Correct.
But it's usually, from what I've seen in quotes, anywhere from $1,200 to $1,800, unless there's a dirt floor. Then it's a little bit more complicated with paper barriers and things like that. But for the most part, that system is really, really simple to put in and efficient, and it's minimal. So a lot of times a seller does not want to have to try to market a home with higher levels of radon. They'll issue that credit. It's very rare I see somebody saying they're not going to work with the buyer and give, a credit or install the radon system ahead of time.
What also happens with that too is once we put in the canisters or the device to measure that radon, and we make the seller aware of it, now that's legally supposed to pop up in the property disclosure.
Right.
So if they didn't know about it prior to us testing, they do. So if they know that they have to disclose it, that's all the more incentive for them to say, you know what? We'll either put the system in ourselves or we'll give you a credit so we don't lose the sale, because now it's public information.
Right, exactly. Yeah. What about another common thing that I'm sure you're seeing is the dirty 4-letter word mold?
So I'm glad you touched on that. So in years past, there was a big emphasis on asbestos. So for those of you that aren't familiar with asbestos is a material that comes from the Earth's crust that was used as an excellent insulator. Because it was an excellent insulator, it used to be around pipes. They used to put it in shingles. They used to put it in tiles. The asbestos material is found almost everywhere because it was very, very durable. And then they had these class action suits where you see these commercials. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with mesothelioma, please call such and such number. That was the big issue probably 20 years ago. Then it transformed over to lead. So we know that lead causes neurological problems in a lot of homes. Lead was a hot button issue. There was a ton of lawsuits with that. Now in today's market, the big issue is mold. So mold is in every home. I can find mold anywhere. But the issue is that mold, there's thousands of different types of mold spores, and you really need to have mold spores sampled and tested to be able to determine if it's highly toxic. You'll see people try to identify mold based on the color. And I'm here to tell you that the color makes no difference. You'll hear people say, oh, there's black mold. The mold that you really want to be worried about is a mold called Stachybotrys. So, and the only way you can determine that it's mold that you see is Stachybotrys is by having it sent out to a lab.
Mm.
The issue with mold in New York State is if you have less than 4 square feet of mold in a particular home, you as a homeowner can remove it yourself. If you have more than 4 square feet of mold, you have to hire a mold remediator and a licensed mold assessor. And those are two different entities. A mold assessor is somebody that comes into a home, he diagnoses the issue, identifies where the mold came from, writes up a plan, and then a whole separate remediation company has to come in and remove that mold to the specifications that the mold assessor set forth. So mold is everywhere. It can be in your attic, it can be in your basement. Oftentimes it's found in your bathrooms if you don't have exhaust fans. It's very, very prevalent. But I don't want to scare people. It is something that can be addressed and removed safely.
And it's very common that we're seeing it in the attic right now of homes. And a lot of times it's just due to poor ventilation, over insulation, a lot of times it's just the shower vent is venting into the vent to the bathroom is venting right into the attic. So literally you're pushing moisture right into that attic space. And then it's so insulated that it's just sitting there and then mold starts to grow. So for the most part, what I find is that a lot of it is just making that attic breathe again and make it killing the mold, treating it, sealing it, and then making it so it can breathe once again. But for home buyers, I like to put it out there. It is not uncommon, and I would say 85% of the home inspections end up coming back with mold in the attic. Now, the nice thing about mold in the attic is that for the most part, if you're not using your attic, it's contained and it's sealed in there. So while you still want to treat it, get it out of your house, it's one of those situations that it's not as toxic, I guess would be the right word, versus if it was mold that was, on your first floor or even in the basement where the spores can rise, move around, be disturbed, things like that. So not uncommon for that to show up in a home inspection. If I'm walking through a home with a home buyer, so we already talked about looking at like the outlets and looking for gutters. What are some really good pointers for home buyers to just take a peek at when they're walking through the home?
So obviously I'm going to have you emphasize on basement walls. So what I'm seeing now in our area is that you're seeing a lot of home flipping going on. So you got buyers that are coming in and they're, buying properties and they're making some minor repairs and relisting those properties. So one of the things that's a telltale sign for me is when I go in basements and I see that the basement walls have been recently painted. Oftentimes that's an indication that we're trying to hide some water staining that could potentially be on those walls. So I'm also going to have my buyers start to educate themselves and start trying to look for horizontal cracks. So it's not uncommon to have cracks in the basement, but we need to differentiate between a vertical crack and a horizontal crack. That horizontal crack is a lot more dangerous. Oftentimes that suggests that there's some sort of water management problem. There's some sort of pressure externally pushing on that foundation wall. Vertical cracks, not so much so. Houses settle, and over time, that settling can result in little small cracks. It's a lot easier to fix. So those are, a couple of pointers that I like to point out that jump out right away that I think people can understand. I just want to touch again on the scenario with mold. What people have to realize in both the winter or in summer, heat rises, right? Yeah. So as heat rises, if it can't escape through that attic, as you indicated, that's why it's so prevalent in the attic. So when we have that change in temperature creates condensation. That condensation is moisture. That moisture ends up on your rafters. It ends up on the sheathing. It ends up on the insulation. So you want ventilation. You want either gable vents. You want ridge vents. You want soffit vents. What we're seeing now, Jen, is a lot of times people take insulation and attempt to make their home warmer and function better, and they tuck it so deep in their house that they actually block the actual soffit vents. So when you're blocking the soffit vents, now you're creating a situation where the attic can't breathe. Yeah, now you got more mold, some mold breeding ground.
Well, that's a good to know.
Yeah.
What about here's a really good one. This is something that I personally always look for because I know it's going to get flagged. The electrical panel, Federal Pacific electric panels.
Yes.
That is something that, go ahead, you tell it.
Yeah. So again, these older homes. So Federal Pacific was a company that was very prominent, and a lot of their products were in a lot of homes. The problem is that their device was determined to be defective and it caused a lot of residential fires. There's arcing that goes on in those panels and catch a fire. So immediately, if I go in the home and I see an old electrical panel that says Federal Pacific, that's automatically a major. And what a major is one single defect that's going to cost $1,500 or more to repair. So in order to take that electrical panel box out, that whole panel, all the circuits got to come out. Sometimes even the drop line that comes, the service wire has to be changed. So that's where the cost is kind of exorbitant, and homeowners shouldn't have to take on that new expense. So oftentimes the real estate agent, along with the attorney, will try to work out something with the seller to say, hey, we got a Federal Pacific box in here. We're not saying we don't want the home, but we're not going to buy the home with this. The other thing that's really important is be very difficult to get homeowners insurance if the homeowner insurance company is aware that there's a federal specific electrical panel box in there. So you're right, Jen. That's definitely a telltale sign that, that's a major defect.
Yeah.
I just want to make No, please go ahead. Oh, I just wanted to make a parenthesis because I think this information is so interesting, and I just want to say something in Spanish for the people out there, because I appreciate, I'm just learning as we are going through this. So, estamos hablando acerca de las inspecciones en la casa cuando vas a ir a comprar. Hay unos puntos súper importantes a remarcar. Fisuras en la casa, si vemos fisuras verticales, John nos estaba explicando que las fisuras verticales son menos preocupantes que las fisuras horizontales. El panel de electricidad, también hay un botón de reset donde es importante saber cómo utilizarlo para todas estas especificaciones, por favor, llamen a John porque obviamente las va a explicar mucho mejor. El panel de electricidad, el MO también es súper importante ver como nos estaba explicando John, por la falta de ventilación y la condensación que existe en los cambios de temperatura que vivimos aquí, el moho se encapsula, y si no hay una ventilación propia, vamos a crear el espacio perfecto para ello. Entonces son algunos puntos que yo quiero remarcarlos en español porque me parecen súper importantes. Y bueno, cualquier cosa más a detalle, obviamente lo podemos ver ya personalmente. Thank you for letting me jump in there, because I was just like, oh my God, I gotta say something.
Yeah, no, and at any time, just let us know that you just want to, for the Spanish speakers that are watching, that you just want to go ahead and translate, because that there is a lot of information there, and it's incredibly important. So just go ahead and, jump in at any time.
Okay, thank you.
So what about for homeowners who are getting ready to sell their home? What are some things that they can look for that, maybe they can see, well, should I fix that? Do I need to fix this? What are they looking for?
Yeah. So again, I would tell homeowners too, on the same way a buyer can have a pre-inspection, the actual seller can have a pre-inspection too. And you can oftentimes get a document that can kind of list some of the things that a potential buyer's inspector may say. So you want somebody to advocate for you too, and have that documentation saying, hey, I had an inspection done recently and this is what was found. The inspector said these things can go a long way with regard to not being in a situation where the buyer has an inspector come in and beat you up on a price and makes a big deal out of things that aren't necessarily a big deal. Mm-hmm. So some of the things that for my pre-listings, I try to encourage my buyers to make sure that their properties have good curb appeal. Make sure you declutter. Make sure that the property doesn't look as personal. So you may not necessarily want to have all your pictures and all your stuff everywhere. You want to be able to create a scenario where they can envision themselves in your house. But from an inspector standpoint, again, I'm going to go into your attic. I'm going to peel back your insulation. I'm going to look for that mold. I'm going to talk to you about, is your bathroom exhaust fan terminating in the attic? Does it have to go out through the roof or through the side of the house? I'm going to talk to you about gutters. I'm going to talk to you about grading. I'm going to give you all this information so you're ahead of the game. What we don't want is for a person to fall in love with your house and then have the inspector come through and kind of kill the deal. We don't want to get that far, not in this market. So why not take advantage and have somebody advocate for you and be proactive so you know a lot of the little things that another inspector could potentially identify.
And how much is usually that assessment?
$100. If you hire Tri-City Pro Home Inspections, that's $100. It's a fixed rate. It's never going to change.
And that's just to go through and say, hey, just to let you know, these are some things that they're going to flag.
Correct.
You may want to address those ahead of time. A lot of things one thing that I think is also mentioned in home inspections quite often, besides the gutters, is grading.
Grading,
have grading of the soil going into the basement, and then sometimes they have gutters and the spout is just literally going right into the corner of the house.
Right.
And then you wonder why that corner is so incredibly wet in the basement. Well, it's pretty easy to track the problem and the source, and it's actually a pretty easy fix. So, walk the border of your house and just see, okay, do I have spots where the water is just constantly dripping or draining, or the grading of the soil is leading the water right to my basement? Are all of my, what would you call those? Outlets to the gutters, are they feeding away?
The extensions, yep. Or to piggyback off that, the other thing is, are my shrubbery, are my trees, all these things at least a foot away from my foundation? Because what we know is that when a tree grows up, the roots do the exact same thing on the bottom. So if I got foliage that's in front of my house, that's too close to my house, I know that the roots from that foliage is going to try to impact that foundation wall. And over time, believe it or not, you can have moisture go through there. You can have insects and pests find their way through there. So I want to make sure all of that stuff is away from the house, at least 12 inches. Right. So that's a good point, Jen. And again, you walk the perimeter of your property and you take a look. Is there some cracks? Is there a situation where I could get a bag of cement for $11 and fix a parge coat, straighten something up so it doesn't look like, we've had an issue here? Is it a scenario where I can create mulch that goes around my flower beds that kind of makes it look newer and more beautiful? All these little things can make a big difference.
What about wood destroying organisms? Let's talk wood destroying organisms for a minute.
Yeah, so the famous one that everybody's going to always think about is termites. Termites. But what I need people to know that there are several other wood destroying insects. So let's talk about carpenter ants. So carpenter ants are just as destructive, believe it or not, as termites. They don't tunnel as much. What they do is they kind of eat through, and you'll see little circles in the actual wood. And what they can do is they can compromise the integrity of the wood. So if this insect doesn't actually ingest the wood, but they eat the wood and they peel pieces of it out in order to create a home in that area. And they can be very pervasive. So what I do is during my inspection, I look for all the woods all around the wood frames. I look for all the woods, the floor joists, the sill plate, your sheathing, your subfloors. I look in all these different areas while I'm in the basement to see if I see any of this damage. And when I do see something that does look a little off, I'm not afraid, Jen, to actually take my screwdriver and actually try to see if I can poke through that so I can see how strong that is. Is that a beam that needs to be sistered up? Again, like you said, a lot of this stuff can be fixed relatively easy. But if you don't know that it exists and you allow it to go on for a long time, you could have real structural compromise, which could lead to, a major, person being injured or the actual house having some serious structural damage.
So, and I always like to bring that up because a lot of people think termites and they're not thinking of the carpenter ants or things like that.
Or carpenter bees.
Yep. Right. Yep. Sometimes people think that they have a rodent problem. They see all these little black spots. And what they don't know is that carpenter ants are actually cannibals and they eat each other. So
I didn't know that.
So you're seeing pieces of the ants that they didn't eat. They think it's mouse droppings and it's actually carpenter ants.
So on that note, one of the other things you just reminded me of is that when you see any of these issues, what I oftentimes try to ask my buyers to ask their agents, is there any maintenance records? Is there any warranties? If the roof has been installed, if we had a situation where lead was removed, if we had a situation where pest was removed, was it removed by a reputable company? Is that warranty transferable? Can we reach out to call them? Can we set up a service contract? Is this a scenario where Orkin comes every year and they treat because of this particular issue? So it's not a scenario where it should automatically be a deal breaker where I see this and I say, you know what, I don't want to be involved. We just need to understand that this house does have maintenance that is required, whether it's brand new or whether it's 200 years old. Every house has to be maintained.
Yeah, it looks like for first-time home buyers, this is a great tip, because when you buy your house, keep all your records when the time to sell come.
Right.
You have everything prepared there. You're proactive, and you think ahead.
Right.
There's nothing nicer than a binder when the buyer goes to buy that has all of the companies that the previous owner has used for maintenance, dates on things, furnaces being serviced, all of that, because not only can the buyer pick up where that person left off, use the same vendors, but then they also know too, like, okay, the septic was pumped, and I know in 3 to 5 years I'm gonna have to do it, so they can keep track of all that, and also use the same company so that the company knows the equipment that they're working on, and it's not it's like going to a doctor and you have to transfer all of your records to the new doctor, and they have to try to figure out and diagnose you from that point on based on past records, where if you've been going to the same doctor for years, they've been able to gradually watch and monitor any pre-existing conditions. It's the same exact thing with using vendors that the previous person used. What about and so the other thing, and this doesn't necessarily mean it's carpenter ants, but if you're starting to see remnants of like sawdust everywhere, that could be carpenter ants, but also
that could be evidence of carpenter ants. Yes, it could. Carpenter bees as well.
What about those beetles? What are they called?
Post beetles. Yep, they do the exact same thing. They do a lot of that tunneling. They eat, they chew up this, and then they kind of like spit it out. So, all of these insects and wood destroying organisms can be treated, and Orkin and Terminex and all of these have great plans to kind of address it, and they can identify what issues you have. And when I do my inspection report, I actually will take a picture of that evidence, so you'll have some sort of illustration. You're not going to remember every single detail in the report, but you, like Jen, you had mentioned earlier, you will have a document that you can refer to. So that now when you reach out to this pest control company, you can say, hey, this is what my inspector found. And they can look at the pictures I took and be able to identify how to treat this specific issue.
That's great.
I think it's important, for now that we have people moving to everywhere, every place has a different needs. So it is very important to go to your professionals and trust them, because I come from Mexico. The construction is so different than here, but I imagine in the same country, if I go to if I'm in a place with there's no snow or much water like here, gutters are going to be different. So always have this information, have people, professionals. Tree City, John Howard, thank you so much. I think this is so helpful for everyone out there, first time buyers, sellers, y para todos los que hablan español también, llámenos para que les podamos explicar más.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. If there's anything I can do, you guys don't hesitate to give me a call.
That's great. And you know what's great? One thing, John is always available. So even if you just had a quick question, it's way better to reach out and have your questions answered than sit there and wonder. And it's a quick phone call. It's a quick text. And it's very, very appreciative, especially when we're at a house and I'm like, I know that I can send you a picture and say, does this look right? And you'll give me the honest opinion. So thank you again for joining us. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions after this show. I mean, we could talk about this stuff forever, but our 30 minutes is up. So I hope everybody has a great Monday. John at Tri-City Pro Home Inspections, give him a call. He is always available for pre-home listing inspections, pre-buyer inspections, and the actual inspection. So thank you.
Thank you.
Send us those emails for the raffle next week.
Yep. Send us a text message with your email, and we will be drawing a winner next week.
Well, it doesn't say it. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.